Hey everyone, this is Nathan Williams with BlackIron79.com, and today I want to talk about putting the recreational players on the correct range at the lower limits so that you know how to play your hand against them. This is really important, especially when you have a hand like top pair. So if you guys have been in that position before, I'm going to discuss that in this video. But before I get started, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. So I'm putting out small stakes strategy videos like this to help you guys in the games that you play in roughly once a week. Alright, so this hand was sent to me by Cesar from the UK, and as you guys can see there, he's got King Jack of clubs in a 2 cent, 5 cent, 6 max game, and this hand was played on PokerStars. Alright, so there is a raise from under the gun. Now, Cesar didn't really give me any details on this player, other than just saying he's a nitty kind of regular. So in this situation, I think it's actually pretty close, because I do think that a nitty regular is probably, he's going to have most pocket pairs in his range here. He's going to have hands like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, a king queen, maybe a king jack. So as you guys can see there, our hand is not really doing amazingly well versus that range. However, one thing that I always mention, especially in my latest book, the Microstakes Playbook, is really understanding the table dynamic and always being aware of who is behind you at the table. And the player to our left, villain 6, who I'm going to talk about more in a second, is a big whale, a big fish, recreational player. So that actually changes this to a call in the spot for me, just because that player is left to act behind us. We always want to be getting involved in hands with recreational players as much as possible. So now, if there was not a recreational player left to act behind us, I actually think this is a borderline fold, because we already talked about this player's opening range here. I definitely think I would be folding this a lot if I was in the blinds. In position, I guess a little bit closer, but as we discussed here, there is a big fish behind us, so I do like Cesar's decision to call here. I don't like 3-betting. I think that should be pretty clear, just given the range that we put villain 5 on, a nitty player under the gun. 3-betting with a hand like king jack suited is a very bad idea versus that kind of player raising from under the gun. So villain 6, now let me get into the HUD data that Cesar gave me on this guy. Alright, so Cesar told me this guy is a 72-33-1 that is VPIP, PFR, and aggression factor. Now, with those kind of stats, by the way, those are HUD stats, that just basically tells you what kind of player you're up against. It's based on hands you've already played against them. You can use a program like Poker Tracker. There'll be a link in the description below to get those numbers on your screen. But when I see on my screen somebody playing a 72-33-1, whatever that is, clearly a recreational player. There's no debate at all. That's a whale, a fish, a huge recreational long-term losing player, the kind of player that we make the money against in poker. So like I talked about before, that's why this is clearly a call for me, because I'm specifically want to be involved in as many hands as possible against a player like villain 6. Even though we're out of position against that player, it's okay. We just want to be in hands against those players as much as possible. So villain 6, as predicted, of course, he's going to make the call because he's playing, what was it, 72% of his hands. So, he's going to be in there with most of them. So it folds, and so we're going 3-handed to the flop. So let's go to the flop. So flop comes with the king 4 deuce, which is really solid for us, of course. And we have the backdoor second nut flush draw as a backup as well. So really solid flop, really strong position to be in, especially against a recreational player. It's going to be a very clear-cut spot versus the nit. If he's in there making big bets and raises, he's probably got the ace king, the king queen. We already went through that player's range, and we're not going to play a huge pot against a player like that unless it comes like a jack on the turn, or we actually hit the backdoor flush or something like that. This player is very, very simple to play against. But versus villain 6, remember, he's the recreational player. Strategy in this hand is going to be totally different. We can certainly play our top pair for value against that player, because this player, remember, is playing 72, I think it was, percent of their hands. He's going to be in there with king 10, king 9, king 8, all the way down, like every single one, right? We're ahead of all of those except the king 4 and except the king deuce, which I guess he might be playing. So as you can see, it's totally different. This hand is actually a perfect illustration of how to put the different player types at the lower stakes on totally different ranges, and how we're going to have a totally different strategy against both of these players. Let's just jump into the action, see how it plays out. Villain 5, the nit does check. So when he checks here, we can pretty much assume that he does not have ace king, does not have king, queen, doesn't have pocket kings, obviously very difficult for him to have. He doesn't have aces or anything like that. He's probably got something, maybe a pocket nines, maybe a pocket tens, and this is typically how a nit's going to play this with two players left to act. They're going to go for maybe a check call line or something like this, where I expect, on the flip side, I expect if he had the ace king or the king queen or the pocket aces, he's going to be making a 35 cents, 40 cents continuation bet here. So I'm definitely putting that. I believe we are ahead of the nit at this point, and I believe he's just going to bow out of the hand most of the time if we apply any kind of pressure. I'm putting him on, like I said, about a pocket nines, pocket tens type hand. So it comes to us, of course. Cesar here with the king jack, and I think we should definitely be making a bet, clearly for value here, especially to start getting value against the recreational player behind us. It's exactly what Cesar does. He makes it 38 cents, about a 2/3 pot or something like that. I think it's a solid amount, a good amount to make. And here's the interesting part in the hand, because the recreational player actually makes a big raise here. Okay, so first of all, the nit does get out of the way. So he's out. We're just against one player now. So this is a very, very interesting spot. Remember that this is one of these kind of classic whale fish, and we had the low aggression factor we already saw with his HUD stats. Typically, these players don't actually raise that much post-flop unless they have a big hand. If they're on crazy tilt, sometimes they can be running a big bluff. But usually if this player is in here with king 8, for instance, he's just going to call our bet on the flop. He's not going to make a big raise here with king 8. Again, unless he's on crazy tilt or something like that. That's typically how these players play. So this is actually a very difficult spot. I am going to say that I would probably make a difficult fold in this spot, or a fairly difficult fold. It does depend on the history a ton versus this player. And as I was mentioning, the dynamic, which is when I say dynamic, I'm talking about sort of the recent history versus this player. This is something I talk about in all my poker books, is extremely important in this spot. So actually, just reading the comments that Cesar gave me on this player, and he said that he had actually, in the last several hands, he'd kind of been beating this player a lot. He'd won several small pots of 10 big blinds, 20 big blinds, and he had tagged this player as a tilted fish. So I'm going with that read. I'm going to say I like the decision here to ship. I think that also that, villain 6 makes the huge raise. I think that this is something that a fish on tilt definitely will do from time to time. Now, I'm going to say if there were no reads like this, if this is, for instance, the first hand we played against this player, I'm going to say that I would prefer a fold on the flop. The reason why I would fold is because the raise is actually huge, and I feel like calling that is almost kind of pot committing us. I don't really want to get in a situation where I'm kind of pot committed against a very passive player like this, with no history, no dynamic in play. But given the read that Cesar had given me on this player, that he's been kind of pounding on this player, he also said that this player has been mouthing off in the chat, I think saying some nasty stuff to him or something, like what fish do, right? So given this read, I'm going to say I do like it. I've talked about this before in several articles on my blog, that this is the whole point, guys, where, you get in there, you start pounding on the fish, and you have to understand how the psychology is going to switch. They're going to flip out at a certain point. You're going to have to make a sort of a loose shove or call, in some cases, versus them based on that psychological dynamic that's in play, that you've tilted them. This is a nit, the villain 5, we would never, ever, ever be doing this, because he's just going to, snap call with his pocket aces or ace king, as we talked about before. So I hope this is you guys are understanding the ranges and also the psychological factor involved here when we're talking about a fish on tilt. So with all that said, I am going to agree with Cesar's decision here to shove, but only because of the notes that he told me of the recent history. Once again, in a vacuum with no history versus this player, I'm going to recommend a fold on the flop, considering that the raise was huge. If he had made it just, a mini raise, for instance, on the flop, then when we can just call. But anyways, I know you guys want to see the results of the hand, so let's just check it out. Villain 6 does, in fact, make the call. And there's nothing else to say. That's obviously a great card for us on the turn. See if we can hit our backdoor. We do not hit our backdoor. We're going to go to a showdown. It was up with the king deuce. Clear evidence that it's a recreational player. King deuce pre-flop. Nice hand. Guys, this is going to happen, definitely sometimes. We always need to remember, though, we're playing against a range in poker. I think that, from time to time, when it appears that they're flipping out, it appears that they're on tilt, they actually just do have the nuts. He does have the pocket fours, the pocket deuces, or the king deuce in a situation like this. It's obviously it's difficult to put a player like this on a hand. As I've said many times before, fish get the nuts too. It's just a part of the game. We did actually have a lot of equity even when the money went in, because we had the backdoor flush draw plus a chance to counterfeit them or hit a higher two pairs. So it actually wasn't the worst scenario in the world. It would have been a lot worse if he had pocket deuces, for instance. But I'm going to say overall, as I always talk about in these videos, that I'm always concerned with the process in poker and not individual hands. And given the read that Cesar gave me on this player, that he'd been pounding on him, that was probably in this player's head, that this player was getting mouthy in chat and was probably a fish on tilt, I'm going to say I do like the decision versus this player's entire range. I do think he's flipping out here quite a bit with the king 8, the king 9, all of that, crazy stuff we talked about before. There's a lot of draws as well on this board. There's a lot of an ace 5 gut shot. There's the spade draw, of course, on the flop. So I'm going to agree with the decision overall. It's an unfortunate result. But anyways, I hope this hand was helpful for you guys. Just understanding ranges in a vacuum once again. Very, very different player types, villain 5 versus villain 6, and how we talked about how they're, we're going to play totally different against them. But also then discussing the psychological aspect, which is a huge, huge part of poker that a lot of players don't really understand. I actually have an entire section in my first book, Crushing the Micro Stakes, called Fish Psychology, and that talks about this in particular, how you need to understand they're going to flip out sometimes. It's the whole point when you start raising them and betting them again and again. It's why I always recommend that, because the crazy switch in their head's gonna go off and you're gonna have to make the loose call sometimes. But unfortunately, sometimes they're also gonna show up with the nuts. It's just part of poker, guys. It's gonna happen sometimes. You're gonna have egg all over your face many times in this game, and you just have to learn to accept it, because again, we're playing against a range. We're not playing against individual hands. His whole range here is not just king deuce or king 4 or the pocket fours or something. It's king 9, it's king 10, it's king 8, it's flipping out with 3-5, it's flipping out with 4-7, anything. Like, it's flipping out with 10-8 if he's just completely lost his mind on tilt. So I like it overall. It's obviously a little higher variance when you're playing against these players, and I think the moral of the story here is they're going to have the nuts sometimes. It's unfortunate, but I think we played this hand well against this player's range and the psychology involved with the previous history, the dynamic, the specific dynamic with this player. But anyways, those are my thoughts on this hand. As always, I want to know what you guys think, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you play versus recreational players with a top pair type hand like this? We get a backdoor draw like we had here, and they start raising you, and you perhaps have been mixing it up with this player. What is kind of going to be your reaction to a spot like this? Are you going to agree with my decision? You got to go with some hands that are a little less than normal up to your standards, or are you going to make a tight fold, or what's your general thought pattern in a spot like this? So let me know your thoughts on this hand in the comments below. As always, if you guys enjoy watching microstakes poker strategy videos like this, make sure you subscribe to the channels. I'm putting them out all the time. And also like the video. And lastly, if you guys want to know my entire strategy to crush these low stakes games like this, make sure you grab a copy of my free poker cheat sheet. It's called Massive Profit at the Micros. It's a roughly 50-page little free guide. It gives you charts on what hands to play, when to bet, raise, fold, all that kind of stuff. So it's free. It's the top link in the description below. And yeah, it should help you out in your games. So anyways, thanks a lot for watching, guys. This has been Nathan Williams with blackgreen79.com.